So good evening, everyone. My name is Jack Lightstone, and I'm the president of Brock University. And it is my pleasure to welcome you here, not only on behalf of Brock and myself, but also on behalf of two of my colleagues, Amit Chakma, the president of Western University, and Alan Wildeman, the president of the University of Windsor. These are the three universities that are co-hosting tonight's event. The theme of tonight is basically Welcome to Life in 2030. And this evening will give you a chance to peer into the possibilities of the future with the input of people who work at our universities, engaged in research, whose cutting-edge research today will impact the future that some of you will live, and in some cases your children will live. The last decade, or I should say the last decades in the plural, has seen immense change. From the technological side, that's very evident to all of us. I mean, just think this little thing I have here. It's not a commercial. It's a but it is, in a way, BlackBerry Z10. There is more computing power in this device than there was in the entire mainframe computer at the university at which I did my undergraduate education in the late 60s. It's remarkable. So I must add, too, if any of you are of my generation and grew up on the first Star Trek television series, when Gene Roddenberry thought of a handheld communicator, well, here we have a handheld communicator and much more. So it is obvious to all of us how much our lives have changed as a result of technological advances over the past decades. It is not so obvious, because it is more subtle, how our lives have changed because of other research done in non-technological fields at our universities here in Ontario and elsewhere around the world. Just to give you an inkling of how much change has occurred, I speak biographically. My area of research, personally, has almost nothing to do with technological change. In fact, most of you might consider it arcane and irrelevant. I'm a historian of religion with a specialty in religion and its relationship to power and authority in the Roman world in the eastern end of the Mediterranean. That is about 2,000 years ago. A very arcane field. One of the things that we learn from this research is the relationship between religion and power struggles of governance. Is that not relevant to understanding the world today? I would say 60 years ago, we believed that the world was headed towards, on a secular path, of decreased influence of traditional religious institutions on modern-day politics and government. But that hasn't been the case at all. And oddly enough, research done by people, even in my field, impacts, I think, the capacity to develop policy and strategy in dealing with geopolitical issues today and into the future. All of a sudden, we're in demand as advisors in understanding processes and governance processes and political processes around the world. And that's true of so many of the fields of research in our institutions, whether they are in science, engineering, medicine and health, business, social sciences, or even the humanities. So the COU, the Council of Ontario Universities, acting in conjunction with its 21 member institutions, the 21 universities in Ontario, have organized this series, Research Matters, to give a sense of how the research conducted today in our universities in a variety of fields will impact technology in the future, healthcare in the future, policy making in the future, in order to change and better the lives of Ontarians, Canadians, and others beyond our borders as well. Tonight's panel is the fourth of 5 such panels being held around our province. Panels like this have been held in Kitchener-Waterloo, Sudbury, Oshawa, now here, and the next event will take place in Toronto on May 9th. We're honored to be the host institution for our triumvirate here of Brock, Western, and Windsor. And Brock, together with our partner institutions, is working to be a leader in research and to translate that research into the communities around us, directly and indirectly, and even most importantly, through our graduates. One of the most important ways in which we translate universe into society is because research, impacts our teaching, and through that teaching impacts our graduates who become the leaders of the societies of tomorrow. So I think this is a great opportunity to celebrate research at Ontario's universities, to understand that research matters, and to have some fun peering into the future. Our moderator this evening is a very well-known among us. I'm talking of Mr. John Storm. John hosts a well-followed program here in Niagara and is known as an important personage who in his own way helps Niagara peer into its future and shape its own future. And so I'm delighted to hand the podium over to John.
Thank you, Jack. When I first heard about this project, I thought we have to do this because I'm very selfish. 10 years ago, I thought I could come up with a pretty good idea of what the future would hold for my family, for our community, for our country, for our world. Today, I don't know what's going to happen at 10 o'clock. The rate of change is so fast that it terrifies some people. Happily, we have people in our universities in this province who are doing research to give us a little solace that it's not as terrifying as we might think it would be. So tonight we're going to celebrate some of that. I think the question tonight, what will life be like in 2030, is an important one. This is for us, for your children, for your neighbors and colleagues. It's important for individuals because many of us intend to stick around for a long time, and it's useful to know what we have to look forward to. As we get older, medicine has to change because we're changing. It's also clearly important for business, whether it's a tech startup or a resource company. Industry needs to have a sense of where things are headed so that they can start making plans now. Even though the rate of change is so fast, you still have to plan. Governments as well need to keep an eye on what life holds for the next generation. We're seeing seismic changes in how people are voting around the world. Jack's point about religion, whoever thought that it would be as powerful as it is today across the planet? It's very easy for business to get caught up in the latest trend, and it's equally easy for governments to think in terms of the next election, and that's just a fact. That's one of the reasons why university research is so valuable and so important. It helps us focus on the big picture, the big prize. It steers us toward policies and practices that keep people, companies, and communities thriving in the long run. So, tonight we want to learn. I sure want to learn. I hope you do. I think anyone who came out tonight wants to learn. We've got 3 distinguished professors from across the province, and we'll go one at a time. Each will have about 15 minutes to present, and then we'll open it up to a question and answer period. I'll walk around with a mic, and that will allow you the opportunity to ask a question. So, it's my privilege to introduce our first speaker. Debbie Inglis is with the Brock Covey, and she'll tell you what Covey is and winemaking in 2003.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. It's great to see so many people out tonight. So, what will life be like in 2030? Oh, can we start the PowerPoint? Okay, thanks. So, I'm going to start off with looking at what we can expect with climate change, because for the grape and wine industry, climate change is really going to have a huge impact on what our industry looks like in 2030 and beyond. So we have to start by looking at the volatility of the weather, and it's going to continue to increase to be very volatile. So that means we can expect to see extreme temperature highs during the growing season that may cause heat stress to the vines and impact fruit quality. We can also expect to see an increased number of cold weather events through the winter, and that can have an impact in terms of hurting the vines, causing a phenomenon known as winter injury. Lack of rain or excessive rain can also impact fruit quality. We can continue to see unexpected weather events such as hail. So up on the slide here, there's a picture of some grape clusters that got hit by hailstones. That's not something we like to see in the vineyard. We can expect to see increased disease pressure from new diseases or just from diseases that we currently have, but they display more often and in different regimes. There's going to be increased pest pressures. There's going to be increased pest pressures. So the insect pests may change their behavior. So typical pests like great berry moth may have extra generations in the vineyard, and that means more damage that can occur to the fruit. We may also see things such as emerging new insect pests that we, at this point, don't quite know how to deal with. So the brown marmorated stink bug, or the spotted winged Drosophila that can pierce fruit and cause breakdown of the fruit and things like acetic acid to develop in the fruit. So I know I had to start off with this, but is it all doom and gloom? And my answer to that is absolutely not. Challenge means opportunity, and that means let's get innovative, and let's get innovative together between university researchers, industry, and government. We've done it before, and we'll do it again. So when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. Well, in our industry, when Mother Nature froze our grapes, we made ice wine. When Mother Nature froze our vines, we tapped into wind machine technology and figured out how to use it to prevent further damage to our vines. If you look out the back window, you'll see wind machines just in the vineyard across the street. So last week, the grape growers of Ontario, or a couple weeks ago, at their annual general meeting, said that they like to look at the glass half full instead of half empty. And I think I would echo that. However, as a researcher, I like to see the glass completely full with Ontario wine. So how do we do that? We do that by coming together with research partnerships. So a very big research partnership that I'm going to talk about today, and the research extrapolating forward to 2030, was a partnership between universities, industry, and government. And although the initiative was led by Brock University, it brings forward a lot of researchers from many other Ontario institutions, a lot of contributing partners from our industry, such as the Grape Growers of Ontario, the Wine Council of Ontario, the Winery and Grower Alliance of Ontario, Ontario Grape and Wine Research Inc., VQA Ontario. Hopefully you're getting the picture that this means something to our industry. We want to be proactive. We want to look at the impact of climate change and plan for that. Of course, in order to do the research, we have to have funding from the government, from both federal and provincial levels. So in this program, we're looking to take a proactive approach to mitigate the impact of climate change for our grape and wine industry. Through this research, we want to assess the adaptive capacity of our industry to deal with climate change so that we have the ability to adapt and emerge as an even stronger industry through these approaches. Through this program, the viticulture and climate change aspect will really focus on climate change modeling. What can we expect to see in wine regions? Actually, we're extrapolating forward to 2050, but today I'll back it up a little bit to 2030. On the enology, or the wine science side of the research in climate change, we're looking at how to develop new wine styles that can take advantage of some of the situations that we have, and really tailor the flavors of our wine moving forward to what the consumer wants. In terms of climate change, it's not just about warming trends. Yes, it is getting warmer, but again, what we're concerned about right now is how to manage the volatility in the weather conditions. So again, that's those extreme temperature highs, the extreme cold events that can damage our vines, lack of rain or excessive rain, or the warmer than normal winters that you think may be good for vines. It reduces the risk of winter damage. But if we then get a cold event in the middle of winter, the vines aren't as prepared for that winter event. And we actually expect we're going to see more winter damage in the future years. So currently, we're experiencing all of these phenomenon. Just to give you a snapshot of what's happened in the last decade, in 2003 and 2005, those were what we coined in the industry our short crop years, because the winter got so cold and we weren't prepared, it damaged the vines. In 2007, it was our dry drought year. Great for red wines, but it was really hard on the vines and they had a difficult time making it through winter. In 2008 and 2009, they were our wet, cool years, followed by 2010, which was a great vintage. We just had everything at the right time. 2011 was a slow start to the spring. 2012, some coined that as the best vintage on record, so get out there and buy your Ontario 2012 wines. In 2013, as of 2 days ago, we were concerned whether spring was ever going to arrive. So what's in store for 2030? Well, our climatic modeling will allow us to develop what we've coined the Coupled Wine Climate Prediction System. And this will enable grape growers to be able to plan for the varieties that will really grow and perform in their region. In terms of developing our adaptive strategies, some of the questions we raise are, what are the grape varieties to plant that will thrive in the environment of the future and have market appeal? Do these varieties currently exist? Are they planted in the ground right now? Or do we need to look beyond what we have in the ground right now? In order to take a look at this question, we really have to start those evaluations now to plan for 2030. Why is that? Because it takes 5 years for a vine to come into production. Then we need 4 to 5 years to study that vine. So at least 10 years ahead, we have to be planning for renewal of vines or new areas to plant. In terms of viticulture practices, or how we grow our grapes, we need to continue to protect our vines from cold weather events in the winter. So that means using those wind machines that we see outside, coupled to a system that monitors how hardy grapevines are through the winter months. That system we've coined Vine Alert, and it helps growers know exactly when to use those machines to protect those vines. In some areas, though, wind machines just aren't enough to protect from the cold. So we may need to use materials like geotextile. There's a picture of it here on the slide that can be draped over the vines and actually acts like a little mini greenhouse and can protect the vines. There may be new technologies that we haven't even developed yet that can warm up the area around grapevines to protect us from winter injury. And we can look to utilizing hardier vines for the grape varieties that we want to grow in the future. Another key area going forward is access to water for irrigation to reduce drought stress on our vines. We have to make sure we have the proper infrastructure in place. On this side of the canal, we actually have an irrigation water system, but west of the canal, here in the Niagara region, they don't have such a system. It's time now to plan for that, so we have it in place when drought stress becomes a yearly or more often event that we have to deal with. We're also going to see a move towards precision agriculture, so using GPS and GIS technology to help growers manage their vineyards in a much more efficient way and move towards what we call terroir-based wine production. On the wine side, we're looking to adopt methods and technologies that will mitigate production risk, stabilize wine quality, and contribute to distinctive regional styles. So, what are some of those wine styles? I was just thrilled today to see that Trias Winery was pouring sparkling wine. This is a clear area of growth for our region. Often our wines are higher in acidity, and you know what? Sparkling wines require high acidity. It's something we can take advantage of and produce the highest quality wines here, right here in the Niagara region that can compete worldwide. Another challenge for us, often in our fall months when we're trying to further ripen some of those really big red Bordeaux varieties, the weather just doesn't cooperate. It becomes too cool and wet. So what if we look at technologies that allow us to ripen the fruit post-harvest? Ripen the fruit in protected areas like a barn or a repurposed kiln, or maybe even using greenhouses that aren't being used at that time of the year. That leads us to the Appassimento wine style. So you're going to see more and more of that coming forward in the region. What else do we predict for 2030? We predict new regions will be identified for wine grape production based on climate change, based on the fact that we are getting warmer, and new areas can be opened up for grape production. There's one area you may have heard of, the Ontario South Coast winery area, which is just outside of Simcoe, and many wineries are popping up there. One of the key wineries, Burning Kiln, won the Premier's Innovation Award last year because they're making Appassimento-style wines using tobacco kilns that are no longer used to dry tobacco in the area. Other areas, such as in Huron County, Grey County, or Durham County, may become hospitable for grape production. Application of climate science will assist in developing the varietal plan for Ontario. Assessing the adaptive capacity will help us prepare for the future. We're looking at using approaches that are practical. Networking and sharing resources. Being proactive, not always reactive. Let's plan ahead. Let's strategize. Let's lead the way. We'll be the groundbreakers. Be the resource the world turns to. And as you hear my colleagues speak this evening, you're going to see Ontario, we're already leading the way.
Thank you, Debbie. This industry has changed so much, and it's the work that the researchers with Debbie, the work they do that will help us go into that future. I hope you learned something from that presentation. We're going to learn some more in a minute. Tima Bansal is from Western University, and she'll share her thoughts about social responsibility.
I'm going to start with a story about me. So I did my doctoral work at the University of Oxford in the early 1990s. And to understand 2030, I think you sort of have to look backwards as well. So in the early 1990s, I used to spend a lot of time in the library. It was called the Bodleian Library. And now most people think about libraries, they think about stacks like that. The Bodleian is the second largest library in the world, next to the British Library. And so most of the holdings are downstairs. And so as a doctoral student, I used to cycle to the library, fill out a little card, and the card would go then downstairs in the holdings, because a lot of underneath Oxford is books. And it would take 4 hours to get my book. And then you couldn't photocopy it, you couldn't sign it out, so I spent a lot of time in the library, right? Now, if I ever need anything, I just get Google Scholar, and it's fantastic because I can get all the world's holdings at my fingertips instantly. So before I was bounded by what Oxford had, and now I can get anything. It's remarkable. And not only that, I can be anywhere in the world. And so the world of ideas is exploding in ways that we couldn't imagine. That's only in the last 20 years. What we're trying to get you to do is to think 20 years into the future. Think about that change. Mind you, Oxford's living in the 18th century. But what we call that time and space compression. And so basically the world seems smaller and everything seems faster. Just like John said in his opening remarks, is that business is just moving faster. What's the next thing? Okay, and that's sort of what I study. I study time and space compression. Short-termism is an element of that. I'm not going to talk about that right now. I'm going to talk about Apple computers. So when you think about Apple computers, all the Macs in 1984 were built in the Fremont plant in California. In fact, Steve Jobs was known as saying this is a machine that is made in America. I want you to think about the iPhone 4 now. iPhone 4 is designed in California. It has parts that are built from all over the world. It's then assembled in China. And then it's sold back all over the world, distributed back. And so to get an iPhone 4, sometimes the Chinese have to go elsewhere to get the phone, right? And so now we're seeing the movement of products around the world and with such speed. And so we have a new Mac that comes regularly, a new iPhone, a new iPad. You can just see the revolution in terms of products. It's quite frightening in some ways because we can't keep up with the technology. We had Jack's, what was it? Jack's gone. Is Jack gone? Okay, we won't have to talk about RIM then, huh? Or BlackBerry. So that's also time-space compression. I want to talk about an apple tree, though. And by the way, I study corporate social responsibility. My identity, by the way, this is relevant, is sustainability. You'll see why. But so an apple tree then and now. So when you think about really increasing the productivity of an apple tree, this goes back to vines and wine, right? You just, add fertilizer. Add lots of fertilizer. And if you want your apple to stay longer, what do? You genetically engineer it. Okay? And then you get this wonderful big tree. But ultimately, the apple tree is still rooted in soil. And the Apple computer, though, is getting bigger and bigger and moving faster and faster. That's what I study. And so what we have here is a sustainability challenge. I want to just tell you what sustainability is because that's the first question that everybody asks. What's sustainability? This is a definition that's archetypal. This is the one that every sustainability person will refer to. They might refer to it in different ways. But meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. What that's saying is that we want to be able to live in the same lifestyle as our parents did. And more importantly, we want our children to live in the same lifestyle that we have, or maybe even better. It's indisputable. If very few people in this room would argue against that, right? We just think that this is not religion, it's just basic, in some ways, a universal ethic. Okay, this is carbon map. I'm going to pull this all together in just a moment, but this is where carbon emissions happen. And so you can see the hot spots in the world, and they're in the industrialized countries. So you can see a lot of Eastern North America, a lot of Europe, a lot in China, okay? And that's where industry happens. Carbon is a physical element. Carbon dioxide is a molecule. It's emitted in certain places, and that's where you need to reduce it. Carbon markets, on the other hand, quantify, they financialize the carbon molecule. So where does the trading happen? It happens in actually the same industrial areas. But where do they get rid of carbon through carbon markets is in the developed world, because putting up windmills in Brazil is cheaper than it is to put up a windmill in the Netherlands. And so what we'll do is get rid of the carbon in a place that already has low carbon, and we can actually buy futures for carbon markets. And so it's a promise to build some windmills in Brazil that all of a sudden have financial value. And so what carbon markets are doing then is actually compressing time and space, and so we have a financial value on an instrument for something in the future, bringing it to the present, and getting rid of something in a different country for which there isn't really a problem. We have a serious problem with sustainability because markets disembody the solution from the problem. And so we have disconnected the carbon problem by treating it with a financial instrument. And so what's life like in 2030? I'm going to show you a video. And could you start the video? It's just got a little, just move the cursor and you'll see. Get closer, no, get closer to the, oh, move forward. Here. Okay, get closer to the box. And you'll see a little arrow right here. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So what we have here is in the blue is 2 degrees below the average over the period. And the red, which you'll see in a bit, is 2 degrees higher than the average. And so what I really want you to think about is 20 years from before now, so let's say the 1990s, look at the colors. And this is about the time that I started my doctoral work. This is about the time that I was born. You can see that it's pretty neutral at the time. Then you go to, I went to school, went to university, worked for a bit. This is 20 years ago. Look at the change. What is life going to be like in 2030? If we don't deal with the business issues, if we don't start to connect markets and organizations to the physical problems that we can create by connecting time and space, we will accelerate the problems. And this is serious. We have to deal with the business issues. I've got too many words on this slide, but we have disembodied the social environment from the natural environment. And so time and space are being compressed in the social environment through the iPad, through financial markets. And time and space cannot be compressed in the natural environment because ultimately if we're going to grow things, they grow in a certain spot. And so we have to make our organizations and our social environment connected to the time and space of the natural environment. Give me a moment. I'm going to tell you what I think is still the nature, why we have this problem, then I'm going to try to give you some solutions to the problem. What do I think is the nub of the issue? I'm a business school professor at the Ivy Business School, and I've taught business strategy forever. And so for those of you in business who have done a business degree, you know that the main purpose of a strategy course is to get people to grow. I want my managers to grow their business as fast as they can. No matter where they do it, we want to do it as fast, as big and fast as we can do it. In marketing, what's the main purpose of marketing? To sell. Sell as much as you can, as fast as you can. What is the main purpose of operations? Efficiency. Let's cut everything. Cut time, cut resources, cut people. What's the purpose of accounting? It's to measure and control so that we can value everything. And so if we can value it, then we can sell it. And what do we care about in finance? What do they do? The number one thing we do in finance is that we value money and we discount the future because we prefer our money today rather than later. And so we have at the nub of the issue is what we teach in business schools is that we have isolated the issues and we've gotten rid of time and space. Far side. Einstein discovers that time is actually money. And we think about money as time as money all the time. We've got to get there on time. If we can't sell it fast enough or whatever, time becomes money. Time is more than money. You cannot put a price tag on the time that you spend with your children. You cannot put a price tag on the time it takes to build relationships or to grow plants. Removing time or giving it a financial value is like taking the globe, a three-dimensional object, and putting it into a map. You remove a dimension. Some aspects of the map accurately reflect the globe. That's what happens, is that we do end up with markets that really do work and organizations that do work. And then we have huge distortions. So you have Greenland that looks as big as North America. So you can see the nature of the problem is that we need to treat money so that it has, time, so it has value beyond money. That's what I think is a problem, is that in business schools, in business, we have erased the thing that is most important. So I think that carbon taxes will be part of the solution rather than carbon markets, because what do carbon taxes do is they charge at the source of emissions, and they charge at the time of emissions. Another example is what I'm on the board of the London Community Foundation. And the London Community Foundation basically has an endowment. It's like the United Way, except we have an endowment, and we invest the income off of the endowment. Where do we put the endowment? We put it in the stock market. So that means that our endowment is actually funding businesses from all over the world. So it's playing into that time compression piece, space compression. And what we did with the loan fund is say, instead of investing the money elsewhere, let's invest the endowment in social housing in London. And we get the mortgage money and invest that back into the community. That's sustainable development. That builds a community that will be stronger over time. I want to leave you just with a parting story and return back to Oxford. There's a college called New College in Oxford. New College was actually built in the 16th century, so it was new at the time. And if there's a grove of oak trees in New College, beautiful oak trees, and Bursar was asked, can we take down the oak trees? And he said no. And the reason being is that the Great Hall has oak beams, much like this. And the trees were planted at a time that when the beams decayed, the trees would have matured. And so we have created true time and space value that has a real value beyond money.
Thank you, Tima. Certainly I and perhaps others in the room tonight think we need to be reminded of some things that we rarely think about, and that's part of research. Our last speaker tonight is Rup Carvo, who is from University of Windsor, and he's going to talk about energy in 2030. You think it's controversial now. Just wait.
Thank you, John. I'm thrilled to be here. It's exciting to see all you nice folks out. First, I want to apologize because I was really misinformed about this event. I was told it was just going to be a bunch of silly, fun predictions and we'd all have a good laugh. I didn't know that my predecessors were going to come up sounding all smart with fancy slides and animations. I have those too. I didn't bring them. So that said, let me launch into what is surely going to be an embarrassment for me at least, okay? I think long-term predictions are fun. The culpability is inversely proportional to the forecast time length. So Nostradamus, if you think about him, he was an exception, right? He had direct descendants that started the Weekly World News, which kept his legacy going in between stories about the Bat Baby fathered by Saddam Hussein and George Bush, right? So I could tell you guys that, you know, in a billion years, we're all going to be 2 feet tall, same color skin, and speak the same language, but who's going to be around to check, right? 17 years is not that long. And today, in particular, if you think about that, and this has been addressed a number of times already, things happen so quickly, which makes it very difficult to make predictions accurately these days, which is there in place my disclaimer for these next 3 predictions I'm going to leave you with. The first one is that in 2030, North America will be energy independent. And I would like to tell you, and no one's going to believe me, that I made this prediction before the International Energy Academy did. And it's true I did, but no one's going to believe me that, but it's true. And though there will be, you know, market demands will make it so that importing energy will be attractive at different times, North America will be a net exporter of oil by 2030. And how will this be accomplished? This will be accomplished by new, very novel energy recovery techniques. I'm talking about extreme vertical drilling, talking drilling more than 10 kilometers into the earth, very novel horizontal drilling techniques, and of course the very controversial hydraulic fracturing. Now, think about that. There's some really interesting geopolitical implications to that, energy independence. So does that mean there's going to be no more invasions for oil? Probably not, right? Because there's still a market shortage of very interesting and important resources for us all. And let's not forget about renewables, right? By that time, renewables should make up more than 20% of the generation portfolio in North America. The obstacle that we have to get there is going to be the aging and incapable infrastructure for transmission that we currently have. Most people think that it's a technology issue with renewables. Oh, solar's not efficient enough. Wind turbines don't spin all the time. It's actually about transmission. We cannot get the power from those resources. Prediction number 2. Centralized one-way power distribution will no longer be the norm. So energy will truly be a two-way street. Okay? Microgrids are going to emerge. So a microgrid means basically a shrunk-down version of the energy grid. And I say energy grid deliberately. I don't mean just electricity. I'm talking about electricity, I'm talking about gas, and I'm talking about heat. You'll have shrunk-down versions of these in your neighborhood. On the grid might be high school, a Whole Foods, a solar panel manufacturer, right? And the backbone, and of course residences. The backbone will be a natural gas combined heat and power plant that will supply the community with heat and power, and that'll be mixed in with a sprinkling of wind and solar and even micro-cogen. Micro-cogen is basically having a combined heat and power plant inside your house that is so powerful and efficient that you not only are taking care of yourself, but you're selling your power to your neighbors. Okay, so what that means is that consumers will now have a choice. They will say, I can buy my power based on price, or I can buy my power based on origin. Where did it come from? Maybe I'm interested in buying my power strictly wind. Maybe I don't want to buy gas power. Maybe I want to buy power from my neighbor, or maybe I want to buy power from the high school. Okay. Homeowners will be far more connected with energy markets because simply there'll be opportunities for revenue there. And people will be selling heat and electrons to their neighbors and to neighboring communities. My final prediction, prediction number 3. Life in the developing world will be interesting because they will be leading microgrid implementation. Without having a legacy of aging infrastructure, a quagmire of industrial standards that frankly are dated and conflicting, and most importantly, they won't have spoiled consumers' fancies. The developing world will lead implementation driven purely by necessity. In their case, energy independence is a requirement, it's not a market luxury. So in the early stages, most of the technology will be sourced by the developed world, but the lessons for the next generation of microgrid technology will happen in the established microgrids of North Africa, not in the clean rooms and the tech labs of North American universities. And with that, I want to just leave you a little bit more in terms of food for thought. If you think about the developing world and you think about how they're leapfrogging the developed world because of their freedom to do so, they didn't bother with landlines. If you look in developing nations now, it's straight to cell phone. Microgrids are going to be next. And if you join me for my talk, which is actually scheduled here in 10 years, Life in 2040, make sure you come back. I promise to have slides. We'll be talking about drones for peace, and I truly believe this is going to happen, is that one of the most expensive things in the developing world for infrastructure is roads. And if you consider drone technology where it is today, I firmly believe that it's going to be a completely different scene where you have drones delivering medical supplies, construction products, and food for people. So let's take to the air and be excited about the future. Thank you very much.
You've heard 3 perspectives of life in 2030. Now we'd like to hear from you, your questions, your comments, your ideas. I'd ask the 3 professors to come up to the front of the room. I'm going to walk around the room with a mic, and I just need a hand or two to come up. Does anyone have a question or a comment? Yes, please.
All right, so this is the question to Roop. I noticed you left off nuclear in your list of energies. Where do you see nuclear in 2030?
It's a great question. It's a big part of the energy picture. I left it out just because I didn't want to get beaten up on the way out. So I'm used to that enough with wind energy. So no, we can't escape nuclear for quite some time, in my opinion. I'm a huge proponent of renewables. It's a big part of my research portfolio. But the simple truth is renewables are not in a position to replace fossils and nuclear for quite some time. And I can talk more about that in detail later, but nuclear is going to be a part of our picture for a while.
This question is for Debbie. If we introduce new wine varieties that consumers might not be used to drinking or purchasing in the LCBO, how do we get them used to those new wine varieties if it's not a Merlot or a Cab Sauv?
So, first off, in terms of our industry here, we're still relatively young. Gosh, most of the vinifera grapevines, so the Chardonnays, the Pinot Noirs, really only went into the ground in the 90s. And we haven't quite figured out yet where the best locations are to grow the varieties that we currently have. Or in 17 more years or even beyond with climate change, what are going to be the correct varieties? They may be still very common varieties that are known around the world, but just varieties that we're not focused on here. Might there be an opportunity for new varieties? There may. I think it requires research and that consumer behavior to see if people even like those wines and would accept them. But also, don't forget, there's also clonal evaluations to be done. So we only have a certain number of clones of varieties that we grow right now. And again, we may not have all the right combinations worked out just yet. For an industry as young as we are, we're going to have an opportunity in 15 to 20 years when vineyards that were planted in the 90s and earlier have to go through renewal. Typically in our area, grapevines have to be renewed every 30, 35 years before their production just doesn't become economical anymore. So we will have an opportunity at that time to take a look at what we're currently growing, what climate change is. Hopefully we'll have the research under our belt to make informed decisions at that time. I think part of that informed decision is doing the consumer behavior work as well.
Tima, I was fascinated by your presentation. Do you believe that this movement by especially large companies to other parts of the world where they get cheap labor and weaker safety standards and so on, do you see any change in that in the next several years?
I just want to tell a little story. So Apple, do you know why they went to China? Why they use the Foxconn plant in China for assembly? Because it's cheaper? That would be the normal answer to give. Actually, it's because of flexibility, that they can change the size of their operations quickly. And so they can hire 3,000 workers, within a week and have them trained up. They can't do that in California. And so there is an aspect to why businesses are going abroad because of pricing, and I guess just from an economic perspective, that when costs are low, they move abroad, but then as soon as we see with the Chinese currency, that the Chinese currency starts to rise, and that then equilibrates. And now we're seeing a lot more business operating just in, let's say, US and Canada. And so I think that that's what's going to happen, in 2030, is that we're going to see a lot more equilibrating across currencies around the world, and that local will have value.
I'm still, when I think of standard of living in this part of the world, with your scenario, will our standard of living decline or will it increase?
That's an interesting question. What's standard of living? So will we, eat better? Will we live in bigger houses? Will we, You know, in some ways, one could argue that we are over-consuming. And if we're over-consuming, will we have more to consume, and will we be happier? I think that there's going to be a shift away from that. I think that there's going to be a recognition that less is more to some extent. There's another thing that's happening, and you know, these are wonderful questions, and they're very complex. But the other thing that's happening is that we're seeing a wider distribution. This is the Occupy movement, wider distribution in income. And so the rich are getting richer, and the poor aren't getting poorer, but the rich are getting richer faster than the poorer are getting richer, if that makes sense. And that disparity, I think, will continue to happen. And so will the standard of living increase for the people who are less? Yes, they will have more. Will the standard of living increase for the people who are richer? Probably. I think that, and one thing that I didn't state explicitly is that in the world of ideas, time and space compression is fantastic. So we want science and technology to be able to, in the world of ideas, which doesn't cost anything to move, that will keep on improving our standard of living. It's the material economy that we have to worry about.
Yeah, this is for Tima. The question comes from my perspective as an engineer and a social scientist. And
you know that's a contradiction.
I know. I know. That's why it scares me. I'm an engineer doing a PhD in education. So when I looked at your slide of all the different business focuses, and then I looked at all the different business areas and their focus, you know, that slide that you had, it kind of made me think about a question I've been asking myself for a very long time, and I think even Adam Smith might be rolling in his grave when I ask this one. But do we really need growth, or is it not good? You know, does not growth drive greed, which drives overconsumption, which drives more oil, more this, more that? Or is there a positive side to growth beyond consumption?
So I think you're answering your own question, by the way. That was a rhetorical question, but no.
Because for me, I think I'm missing fundamental economics. It just hasn't occurred to me, and so I want to hear it from you, because that's an area where I haven't really studied.
Well, you should.
I know I should.
PhD in business sustainability, but so first of all, Adam Smith, when he was writing in the 1800s, there was a lot of poverty at the time, and so economics had a real fundamental place in the world, because it would allow for the monetization that would put food on the table, quite literally. And so the invisible hand made sense at the time, because we want people to be energized to move, you know, to produce. What happened, though, is that at some point, it's probably in the 60s and the 70s with industrialization, that we ended up with an economy that could produce more than most of us need to consume. And in some ways, it's really served us well, but we've gotten to the point in the developed world where we have more than we need. And so in the developing world, I think that there still is some benefits, because now we see poverty rates dropping, we see gender equality, we see child mortality improving in developing world. So thank goodness for economics. What we don't have yet, and you know, offline we can talk about, heart of business is grounded in economic theory. And what happened was that we took that economic theory, and economic theory, which was quite generous in terms of building social welfare, took it to the firm level of analysis and said, let's not get rid of monopolies, let's try to become a monopoly. And I think business schools, when they took that leap from economics, which is about social welfare, to profits, business profits, we didn't move the business model with us, or we didn't move that economic welfare with us. And so I think that we need in business schools, and this is what I studied, we need in business schools to really rethink social welfare as a central part of business profits, which is corporate social responsibility.
Hi there. We've got 2 children in the audience tonight, and so perhaps they have the most interest in the answers to this question. What do you predict will be the impact on the workforce in 2013? What jobs will be most hot for the children in our audience?
Any one of you.
Well, I heard there's a lot of jobs opening up in sparkling wines.
On a cold year.
Yeah, yeah. They recommend Baby Duck and Spumante Bambino.
Debbie or Tima, any response to that?
I think definitely there's going to be growth in the agriculture sector. There's certainly opportunity here in the Niagara region and across Ontario for growth in that sector, specifically in grape and wine, yes, but also other avenues of agriculture. Maybe not just agriculture for food production, but agriculture where the plants become the little biofactories for compounds that may be the next cure for cancer. So I think that we have a really valuable resource here in Ontario that we're going to further take advantage of in 17 more years.
Very quickly, when you graduated, or those of you thinking 20 years back, what were the professions that you were thinking about? And those professions have changed dramatically. 20 years from now, I think that we can't even imagine what kids will do. I think that the new professions haven't been even realized. We're going to see creative destruction that we've never seen before. The internet, globalization, new business models, etc.
This is to any of the three of you, and it's kind of a follow-up from that question. I'm curious about you're creating a picture of what you think some solutions or adaptabilities that we're going to have. So for somebody to be 30 in 2030, they're 13 right now. So they have to go through the high school system and the post-secondary system. And I'm wondering what you think is gaps in the way the educational system is set up to prepare them to be living effectively, happily, creating prosperity in the kind of worlds that you're talking about.
Who wants to start? Great question.
I don't know it's a gap that can be fixed. Maybe it can by somebody smart, but I think the thing that we're seeing more and more is there's not enough attention paid to the hybrid of science and arts, and I think that has to come together more. Some people are seeing it, but not everybody's drinking the Kool-Aid. So I think if there's somehow, the problem is this time compression that Tima is all about here is hurting us because we need to get more curriculum into less time somehow. So maybe the teaching techniques have to be adjusted, because I would just like to see more arts and science taught concurrently, as opposed to shuffling someone off to engineering or off to visual arts.
Tima?
Sorry, I haven't answered everything. Can I?
Yes, please.
So I think that there's something really fantastic that's happening in education, and that's the internet. And what the internet allows us to do is to learn vicariously, and to learn. Knowledge is everywhere now, and so I think that education is going to move from knowledge to experience. And so in a way, it's going to move away from our hands and from textbooks to something extremely exciting, because now it will be about how we experience our world, and people will be actors in their world as opposed to passive listeners. So I think the future for our 13-year-old is actually really quite fun. I wish I could have learned that way.
In order for us to have farmers in the future, we have to start to include an element of agricultural education in high school, and I would say that is a gap that currently isn't being filled. So myself, I worry about by 2030, when my friends and colleagues that are in the audience today that are grape growers, where's the next generation coming from if our own kids aren't the ones that are going to take over the farm? So I see a gap in the educational system to show them that this is a viable option in the future, and again, being able to network that with the opportunities that are present before them, what life will be like in 2030, and new advances in precision agriculture that go along with that. So science and technology, but from an applied side.
This message is for Tima. What are your thoughts and your views on Bitcoins and how it's going to affect the currency moving forward?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. I don't know. You stumped me. I've only recently become aware of it, and it's one of those things I listen to podcasts, and it's on my next list of podcasts. My intuition is this is very scary because we already have financial markets that are truly volatile, but they have underneath them an asset that grounds them. And so if you have currency that's related to productive capacity or assets, there's something that maintains its boundaries. I just can't help but wonder if these fictitious currencies have a degree of volatility that will become more socially constructed. So that's my intuition, but I don't know.
In your view, by 2030, will the oil companies be as large and as powerful as they are today?
Yes, I think they will. I don't think they'll be identified as oil companies. People will have to look back and see that that was their origin. But that's a process they've been working on for years, is by essentially assessing future threats and agglomerating them in some way or another. So I think they will just be energy companies. And there will be a lot more distribution, for certain, because there's going to be more power to the people, so to speak. And that will change things, but I still think you're still going to see some corporate centrality that's going to be hard, unless Tima gets her way and we start getting some social responsibility, which I would like to see, of course, as well.
Hi, this question is for you, Roop. It's on energy, and we've seen, we have nuclear energy in Ontario for consumption, and we saw an attempt at privatization of the nuclear market with the Bruce Nuclear, and that path sort of worked and it didn't work. And you talked about the consumer having the option to choose, between nuclear energy and, well, not nuclear energy, solar and wind. Is there a pathway that you can see where that is, like where that's going to happen smoother? Like, for example, we have wind energy in Ontario, but it's not sustainable financially for the government as they give out wind credits. And so if we are going to, again, try to sort of privatize or to sort of give the consumer the option to choose that, is there a pathway that's going to be easier? Is there going to be more bumps in the road, do you think, like there was with the privatization of nuclear and with the wind program?
No, I think I would prepare for bumps in the road. There's going to be a lot of bumps in the road because there's so much radicalization of the technology going on right now. Wind and solar suffer from an intermittency complex, which is not their fault. It has to do with the wind and the sun. So don't blame them. But there's this exciting thing called energy storage that smooths out those bumps. So that's going to happen. The challenge is that right now the province has no idea how to even categorize the market for energy storage. They just recently had a request for information on energy storage technologies to try to sort of put a framework together so people can start understanding how to market it. So I think there's going to be a lot of bumps in the near future. But I do believe that there are bumps that we should endure. And I think people should be careful about jumping at saying that our utility costs are going up and it's because of all these nasty new technologies. It's actually not. The utilities are going up because of the aging infrastructure that we have. That's the major cost that drives up utilities. And not everyone really appreciates that. Thanks for your question.
Debbie, I wonder, the whole idea of energy in your sector, the agriculture sector, is that an expensive cost right now? And what are the sort of the high cost items for your sector?
Really, the highest cost item would be the labor, hand labor involved in running a vineyard. And then sure, fuel costs, as fuel costs go up, costs more to run your tractor, would cost more for all the, energy requirements within a winery. So yes, as costs go up, it definitely impacts both the grower and the winery.
So it's the question of Debbie again. You mentioned agriculture and innovation. Obviously, plant biotechnology, it's a huge resource, but compared to the bad press it's receiving, how do you see overcoming that struggle in the future? Because it's a technology we're obviously going to need as demands on land increase, et cetera. Sure.
I think that using techniques in biotechnology don't always translate to genetically modified organisms. So there are other ways, other innovative ways to select plants that have just naturally undergone some genetic change, not by us forcing that change, but through natural selection we can zero in on those plants. And if that change in a metabolic pathway produces more of the end compound that we want to isolate from that plant to make the next cancer drug, then those are the plants we select and further propagate and study and utilize, and maybe there's an additional change that occurs in that plant that we can take advantage of and further propagate. It may take a little more time to go that route, but it's a more natural process and it can be more generally accepted by the general public. So I think often when we hear about biotechnology, immediately people switch to genetically modified organisms, and that's not always the case.
But GMOs are not bad.
Yes. As a scientist that works in that field, I'm a biochemist and certainly have, yes, right, bad. But again, I think overcoming that perception of the public inhibits growth. So along with that, we can use GMOs to cut to the chase, to figure out the strategy we want to go with, to get what we need to look for in the end result. But then often there are other avenues we can follow to get to that result that is more acceptable by the public. And I think that's the route that's happening going forward, at least with many of my colleagues that I carry out research with.
Thank you, Debbie. We have a question back here on sustainability.
Thank you. I was glad that you brought up that concept of sustainability. It is a very complex one. It's like justice. Our Aboriginal people had a philosophy that what we do, our generation does, how does that affect 7 generations on the road? And sustainability is one of those things that we banty about. And how do we pressure government to consider what sustainability is and encourage our society to do that? We have a couple examples of sustainability. When you're talking about deep drilling, Atlas Steel used to be the premier drill manufacturer in the world for hard rock drilling. We're embarking on a new age of deep drilling. We've lost that. Lakeland Steel has just been bought up by an American company for their fracking pipe. So we have no government that is really pushing or directing us. How do we inspire government?
That's a fantastic question. I think the easy answer is just we would elect someone that cared about these issues. And we seem to always fail on that front. This isn't being recorded, is it? So my own point of view is that I think that government is playing less and less of a role into the future. And the reason being is that, and it goes back to this time compression thing, there's no actor that's more short-term than government. And I think that we've made an assumption that government is looking after a long-term future. Increasingly, I think government is now thinking about the next election. And so and budgets and all are just shrinking. And so they're becoming more short-term. So who's going to take over that role? I think corporations, whether we like it or not, or businesses, our organizations, whatever you want to call them, are going to be the future actor that's going to have to look after our social environment. This is why I'm in a business school, because I really do care about sustainability. And I do believe that we can fix the business model in a way that businesses will normally think about future generations. And how do we do that? Is that we give time and space a value beyond money. And I think that that actually is a large part of the solution.
Do you see our population continuing to grow, maybe still by 2030, but beyond 2030? And if the population, the global population continues to grow, how do you then prevent business growth or slow down business growth?
It's a fantastic question. In terms of population growth, I don't have a crystal ball, but you know, so they have projections. And what's driving population growth, right? It's a lot of it's in the developing country, and people need children to be able to maintain their standard of living or life. And so I think that there's a degree to which we're going to see a rebalancing at some point. And if you're Maslow, you know, believe in, oh, not Maslow, shoot. Anyway, there's going to be a readjustment. And I think climate is going to be part of that readjustment, resource constraints. So at some point, it's going to it's going to reach a point where I think we're going to stabilize. The question isn't population, the question is consumption. We consume something like 10 times more what the developing world will consume. And so we need to control consumption, not population. So if they have 10 times our population, that's okay. What's going to change consumption? That I don't know. And I think there's a psychology in this. We always want more. And we don't want more just because we're happier. In fact, after a certain point, we reach a level of happiness. We want more because we want more than the next guy. And so how do you change that? Is that this relative competition, right? Because we're ratcheting up. And I think that this whole question of equality or inequality is part of the answer. In the Scandinavian countries, they have much higher taxes. They have much less consumption in terms of and energy consumption as well. They have a higher level of happiness. They have less crime. They have higher education. Across the board, the Scandinavian countries live better than almost anywhere else in the world. So income disparity, I think, is going to be part of the solution to having us not want to just have more.
And Debbie, we can start with you. This notion of research matters. It matters to you, matters to many of the people in the room. To some people, it doesn't matter that much. How do you have to change your message to have more people understand that research matters?
I think as a university professor, and I think you saw that tonight when we all spoke, we weren't speaking tonight as we were lecturing in our university classes. We were speaking to the community about the value and the impact that the type of research we do will have locally, globally. And I think that's the attitude change that has to occur from us as researchers to be able to learn how to verbalize and talk about what we're doing to our local communities in a way that they can connect to what it is that we do.
Thank you. Rob?
Yeah, it's hard to improve on what Debbie said, but I think you have to make it matter to the person that you're addressing. So they need to be able to relate to it. And beyond that, you need to enthuse them about it. It's not enough to just relay facts. I think it's important to be a bit of a cheerleader for the cause and make people appreciate the consequences of the work.
Tima?
Well, why are you guys all here? Because you care, right? But I'm in a business school, and I don't know if you saw at the front, but we had some brochures on the Network for Business Sustainability. And so the network actually connects researchers to businesses. Businesses want to know what researchers have to say. And I think that we have this ability to sort of reflect deeply about issues where businesses are trying to get things done. And I think researchers need to do relevant research, and so we need to connect to the business community. And so I think that they hit it on the head, is this, that the world's changing in such a way that we're not ivory towers, that we are now part of a community. And that community is much more accessible than it ever has been.
About energy, the ideas of power going to the people in smaller grid formation is the new idea to me, and I'd like to hear you explain that more. Something about businesses for making heat that you would buy from your neighbor. I forget what you called that, but I've never heard of it. Can you spend a little time on that?
Sure. Yeah, so I went quickly over that, but the premise of a microgrid is basically you're shrinking down the electric grid and you're more or less minimizing the centralization of power distribution. Right now, power is distributed one way. So you've got enormous generators, be it big natural gas, big nuclear, hydroelectricity, some wind, and that goes into the grid and it gets shot out one way to us as consumers. A microgrid proposes where you may be a community of, let's say, 50 homes, some light commercial, and perhaps some light residential, and maybe some institutional in there. So you've got schools and such. And there may be a sort of a large backbone generator there that may be something that, I use natural gas as an example because of the recent abundance in natural gas has driven prices very low. It's the most sustainable of the fossil fuels. So it's seen as a sort of a nice backbone because right now people are not comfortable with renewables doing the heavy lifting. So you may have what's called a cogeneration facility. Cogeneration means that we use natural gas in a turbine and we explode the natural gas in a controlled explosion that drives a turbine, which is coupled to a generator, which makes electricity. As you can imagine, that explosion, that combustion generates heat. So we take both the heat and the electricity and we push the heat out to people's homes. And the interesting thing about this combined heat and power, it's being used now. In fact, our university was the first one in Canada to have such a facility, is that it's been miniaturized now and you can have them in your home. They produce electricity and heat in such an abundance that you can sell off the excess. So this business of a microgrid means that, again, everything is much more communal and redundant. So the day that it's not windy, it's sunny. The day that it's not windy or sunny and it's raining and your energy storage is low, then you have natural gas. So there's this sort of redundancy and a mix. The energy future is going to be a mix. There's not going to be a single solution. And so that's sort of what that's about.
Rupp, over the past several decades, we've heard these ideas around energy, and they sounded great several decades ago. Why do we not have those great ideas in place now? Is there a disconnect that takes place?
Yes, it's government.
Pardon me?
The disconnect is government. Is you've got shifting sands of there is no long-term policy that will survive a government change. And that's really been, in my opinion, that's really been the challenge. And it's difficult for governments because, as Tima pointed out, energy is a big deal. And if you want to put your foot down, you're going to be attracting some voters and turning other voters off.
All right. What I'd like to do is thank the three speakers. And perhaps before you take your chairs again, just tell us in a minute or less what you expect in 2030. Tima?
You know, I'm a bit bipolar. And I go from this mood of optimism for 2030, saying that we have the technology and the ingenuity and the creativity to do something fantastic, to thinking, oh my God, we're going to suffer some really serious disasters. And so, I don't know. You know, I don't have children. And so for the people who said that there's 2 children here and who are thinking about their own children, I really don't know where my children will be. And I am glad that I'll be retired in 2030. So, yeah.
Thank you, Tima. Rupp?
I'm a huge Pollyanna. I can't deal with those negative forecasts. Honestly, you'll see me in the parking lot crying if I start thinking about that stuff. So I honestly, I think it's going to be awesome. Yeah, I mean that seriously. The Brock president talked about the first Star Trek. I watched that in reruns, and they talk about the indomitable human spirit. I firmly believe in that. I really think the future's bright.
Thank you. Debbie?
I would echo that. I'm an optimist, and I think there's great things on the horizon. It's not that there's not going to be challenges along the way, but we're innovative, and you know, that's what makes us all click, I think, as researchers. And I think there's going to be lots of opportunity ahead.
Maybe there should be some research on are you a positive or negative person? Who knows? So we're coming to a close to the evening. I'd like to invite Gary Libin, who's the Vice President of Research at Brock, to give some final thoughts. Gary?
Thank you very much. What a great evening. Really, really wonderful. So thank you again, speakers and John, and thank you all for some really very thoughtful questions. And I don't know what 2030 is going to look like, and you know what? I'm happy I don't know, because I think it would be awfully boring if we did. And as a researcher, I feel the same way. That if we had all the answers, we would know that we're pretty dumb. We started our discussion today, thinking about research, and Dr. Lightstone talked about research and students and classroom events making it out into the real world, that is the world outside of the classroom. And I think I'm a psycholinguist. I study language representation in the brain. I can tell you, we know 1,000 times more than we knew 20 years ago. I can also tell you that if we're lucky, we know 1,000th of what we need to know. And that's what makes it exciting. So I know what that makes me, along with my students, and they, along with me, researchers. And this evening is really that kind of event. So if we're going to make a better 2030, we're going to do it together as a community. I think maybe the old days were days in which universities produced answers and people consumed them. Those are the old days, and those are not the better days. These are the better days. The better days are days where communities and researchers and other partners work together to ask what are the right questions, so we can find the answers together. So you've heard three speakers, and of course just touched the surface of their research. They've spent many years, and will spend many more, generating some answers, and we hope many more questions. These are about 21 of the speakers that you will hear that are part of this series, and those are 21 of many thousands of dedicated professionals in 21 Ontario universities, your universities, our universities. So let me ask you. This is suggest to you that this is the beginning of a conversation, certainly not the end of one. And let's take the opportunity to continue that conversation. I understand there is another event on May 9th at Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. If at all possible, please get out to that. If that's not possible, send emails, tweet, stay in touch. I think we've seen how, in a very real way, research matters. It's really it's really a part of who we are, and it's also who we want to be if we are going to create the 2030 that we really want to live in. And I think, as a researcher, I think back on maybe the foundation of research. Was something that began with the Royal Society, and that was a motto that says, basically, don't listen to other people. Go find out for yourself. And we're looking at a culture where we go find out for ourselves and for the children in the audience and across the province and around the world. So I thank you very much. Please join me in one more time thanking our three extraordinary researchers. And John, thank you very much, Elias. And it's all that's left for me is to say, on behalf of Western and Windsor and Brock Universities, thank you again. Have a great evening. Drive carefully.